Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world, ladies and gentlemen. I welcome you to this webinar session. In today's session, we're going to discuss the findings of research we've conducted, and what this research is telling us and has told us is that there are still opportunities for growth. Many of you will already be familiar with our annual Diamond Inside reports, which we first started publishing in 2014, with the aim of course, providing an evidence-based summary of the outlook and trends across the diamond pipeline. This year, in light of recent global events, we have made the decision to publish a series of smaller, more focused research updates, which will be looking at a variety of areas. Today's presentation is the first of these sessions and will be followed in the coming weeks and months by additional webinars. Each webinar will be focusing on the aforementioned findings of specific research. Before I introduce today's presenters, I wanted to take a moment to reflect on where we are in this moment in time and place. I also want to outline why I remain optimistic for the future of the diamond industry. It is, of course, a self-evident fact that the spread of COVID-19 has indeed had a profound and far-reaching social and economic impact internationally, with very few industries remaining unaffected. We have experienced the enforcement of restrictions on the movements of not just people, but also goods, with economic activity being severely impacted across a wide range of industries and geographies. For us in the diamond industry, we've seen consumer demand for polished goods fall substantially and have experienced unprecedented challenges in our sales of rough diamonds from Botswana. But we have worked to meet our clients' needs where we can. More recently, we have seen the emergence of social upheavals in the US and in Hong Kong, both of which are having an impact on the lives of millions and indirectly also on our industry. However, amongst all the turmoil of the last few months, I see a new and better way of doing things as a result of having no choice but to continue to morph into something better, something smarter, more pliable, more empathetic, and more kind. For us at De Beers, we've been encouraged by how quickly demand for diamonds in China has returned after the lifting of lockdowns, and we've been pleasantly surprised by sales. As will be discussed, we have also conducted research that has indicated that consumer desire for diamonds remains strong, with consumers now focusing on buying fewer, better things, which denotes not just financial, but also emotive value rather than volume, a category that diamonds fits into perfectly. We're also seeing some positive impacts from lockdown restrictions, with consumers expressing an increase in gratitude for things that were before taken for granted, such as spending more time with family and expressing love in its many hues. The majority of consumers that we asked also said that gifts should be meaningful above being practical, and that diamonds remain the #1 gift symbolizing intimacy, connectedness, and love. All of these research findings and more will be discussed in much greater detail shortly. But before I hand over, I want to finish by saying how vital it is that as an industry, we continue to show care and compassion and act as one. The monumental efforts and sacrifices that many of us have had to make over the last few months will be lost if we don't continue to work together. We must all remain vigilant, and while we still have a bumpy road ahead, if we continue to support each other, it is my sincere belief that we will, as an industry, emerge stronger and more resilient, which gives me the perfect segue to introduce two amazing women, Amazons as I call them, who represent exactly that, resilience. The first you will hear from is the hip and life trendsetter and researcher, thought leader on an array of topics, Bronwyn Williams. She will be discussing the macro trends as they relate to the diamond industry and what they mean for us. Following her, you will hear from the highly considered mind of the De Beers Group Head of Strategy Development, Esther Oberbeck, who will take you through the results of our research. So without any further ado, it is my pleasure to hand over to Bronwyn to begin today's presentation.
Thank you so much, Mattie. Hello to all of you, wherever in the world you are, in time and in space. So my role as a futurist and as a trend analyst is to make the future clear, to help businesses and individuals understand what the world is moving towards. And to start with, I think in times of chaos and crisis, like we really are seeing across the world on many levels, on social levels, on economic levels, on political levels, and on the social level. We can see this happening across the political spectrum, all the protests going on that have literally set the world alight. It can become very hard to see our way through the current crisis towards the future that we're walking into. But the good news is that as much noise as there is in the system, in the short term, in the current chaos that we find ourselves in, there are still underlying meta and macro trends that are in play. And if we focus our attention on following those underlying meta and macro trends, we get a much clearer picture as to where the world is headed. Now, also when it comes to trends in a crisis, what we like to say is that trends are accelerated or magnified by crises more than they are created by them. So as Friedman said, basically what happens in a crisis is that the world tends to act on the ideas that were lying around at the time. And right now we have quite a few of those ideas and trends that are lying around. And what I'm going to take you through today is what those meta and macro trends are. And hopefully I'll give you a slightly clearer picture as to what the world is going to be like once we have passed through our current baptism of fire that we all find ourselves within right now. So the first of those trends that I want to talk to you about really underlines a lot of the other trends that we look at, and that is particularly what is happening with the middle ground or the lack thereof. So when I talk about the middle ground, I'm talking about this both in a literal and in a figurative sense. So in a figurative sense, I think it's pretty obvious whether you open up a newspaper or scroll through social media or really read anything these days, that the world's discourse has become that much more polarized, that much more fragmented. There are quite wide divisions between different factions in society. And this can be quite a challenge for brands, for businesses, and for individuals. But as I like to say, any challenge, any trend that I talk about has both an optimistic and a pessimistic way of viewing it. And viewed from a slightly more optimistic lens, even though there are these increasing divides across our global and local societies, as is evidenced with the protests going on across the world, there's also an opportunity there for brands and businesses to step up to create shared values that connect across those divides. So that's a huge source of competitive advantage if you can get that right. And when I talk about the middle ground in a more literal sense, I think it's also worth spending a little bit of time looking at what's happening with the shifting middle ground. And here I'm talking more about the global middle class. Now, in developed Western markets, what we're really seeing is the middle class is becoming increasingly fragile and squeezed, both from the top and the bottom. Because once again, crises tend to accelerate what's going on in the world. This creates vicious and virtuous circles where we find the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer, and the middle, for a lot of the time, getting really squeezed in between. But while this is happening in the Western, more developed markets, we're also seeing an equal and opposite trend happening across the world in the global south and the global east, as we're starting to see these much younger demographics coming of age, creating a brand new, very strong middle class. So if we just follow the demographic dividend window of opportunity across the world, it's currently pointed right at China, where the middle class is becoming very, very strong. Thereafter, that magnifying glass is going to swing over into India over the next couple of decades. And by the middle of the century, that demographic dividend window where the future world's middle class is going to be living is actually going to be based in Africa, where I am today. This is quite exciting, but it does definitely show that that middle is shifting, and the shifting ground can be both a scary and a strategic place, depending on how your business approaches it. So to sort of extend that concept of these underlying fissures in our society into the next trend I want to talk about, that would be the increasing dichotomy between the perspective of sustainability and the perspective of growth. Now, if you listen to the sort of narratives going on in the world right now, we're almost being told that we have to choose one or the other. We either have to choose to protect our natural resources and focus on sustainability, or we can have growth. Now, if you look at the pictures that I have on the screen there, that does really put that sort of trade-off into quite stark contrast. So on the one side, we've got a picture of Earth's first climate refugees. These are Australians who found themselves displaced, perhaps permanently, due to the massive fires it ravaged across their continent just a few months ago. I know it does seem like we've lived through a lot more than 6 months since that happened due to everything else that's gone on in the world, but it was still a fundamental turning point that I think focused the world's eyes on the importance of sustainability and starting to make some very real choices as human beings, as businesses, as nations about a more sustainable way forward. And contrasting that very dystopian picture of Australia there is the picture of smoke chimneys, sort of representing that petro and coal-based economy that has been driving growth to date. So when viewed like that, the picture can seem quite pessimistic, that we're going to have to choose one or the other. But as a futurist, I like to say that the word and is always better than the word or the word but. And if we just shift our focuses a little bit, there might be ways for us to drive sustainable growth going into the future. So for an example here, I've pulled out the example of Kate Roth and her donut economic model that looks to the UN Sustainability Development Goals to overlay with economic objectives of different nations that she tries to work with. And Amsterdam has actually adopted her framework exactly here. So the whole point of this donut economics is to look at growth from a more holistic perspective to make sure that that growth is staying within the bounds of our natural resources that we can use as human beings, and that it doesn't overreach our natural sinks either in terms of pollution. So that's a way to look at growth being more sustainable and more long-term. But because she's also layered in the Sustainable Development Goals, this model also looks at sustainability from a social perspective as well as from an economic perspective. And that's quite an interesting point, because while these discussions are being had at a leadership level, we're also seeing ground up change from consumers, where consumers are increasingly looking to move away from their conspicuous consumption models of purchasing disposable consumer goods that end up in landfills after very little use, in exchange for rather favoring much more sustainable, longer lasting products. So talking about better quality of garment that lasts for decades rather than for mere months. Looking at jewelry that can be handed down from one generation to a next. Looking at furniture that's going to stand the test of time rather than just being a disposable good. So we are definitely seeing an emerging consciousness amongst consumers and of citizens about the importance of sustainability on a very practical environmental level. But then to move on to the next trend and the next sort of division that we're sort of seeing that also represents an opportunity to bridge, of course, I'd like to talk briefly about the new lines being drawn in the geopolitical sand. And here, once again, we can see how the current crises going on in the 2020s are unpacking and enhancing and accelerating those underlying trends. For quite a while now, economists and societal spectators and people that look at society have been saying that perhaps globalization has some sort of limit, that there are trade-offs that are being faced by nations. And we've seen these sort of fractures splitting with the things like the Brexit vote and with the increase in populism going on around the world. And even once again, the protests, all in some ways a bit of a pushback about homogenous globalization. And of course, there are trade-offs here because globalization has brought us amazing efficiency as consumers and as businesses and as nations, and has brought a lot of wealth to the world. But at the same time, globalization does expose us to some risks. So what we gain in efficiency, in many cases, we are also losing in resilience when we come to face global crises, as we have seen firsthand during the current crisis, when many businesses suddenly found themselves cut off from their supply chains. So the opportunity here is for businesses to start investing once again in local and regionalized supply chains that can also not just make their businesses more resilient, but can also perhaps start investing in building value for those communities. But before I move on from this point, from a commercial perspective, I think it's quite interesting to look at the fact that these new lines being drawn in the sand the new balkanization, if you want to say that way, of the world, the new geopolitical fault lines are falling in slightly different places for the commercial sector than they are from the political realm, which is quite interesting. So once again, corporations and businesses are seemingly able to build bridges between different markets that politicians are unable to do so at this particular point in time. But to then extend this concept of these new trade routes and perhaps the resilience and the importance of building more secure local trade routes into the next trend I want to talk to you about. And this is how local supply chains and investing in shorter supply chains that deal with local communities can also help businesses to tackle probably the biggest threatening trend going on in the world at the moment, and that is the trend of rising inequality, both on a local level and on an international level. So UNICEF's put out a paper not too long ago saying that the 8 richest individuals in the world have a combined worth of around about the same net worth as the bottom 50% of the world's population, which is absolutely extraordinary inequality. And inequality is not good from a social stability point of view at all. So that's not the sort of world that you can build a resilient, sustainable business in, nor is it a world where geopolitics or local politics is going to be particularly stable. And we've seen that through the current COVID crises, how these crises have exacerbated existing inequality patterns within our local and global societies. But once again, there's an opportunity here for businesses to start looking at investing in more sustainability from a social perspective, as well as from an environmental perspective. And a socially sustainable business is a business that increases in shared value across all stakeholders in the supply chain rather than in extricative processes. Which brings me to the next very parallel trend here of how we're starting to see different business models emerging. The one big business model emerging at the moment would be that of the platform economy. These are the massive technological giant corporations across the world, the FANGs as they're sometimes called, that are all essentially in the business of creating two-sided marketplaces. So two-sided marketplaces are marketplaces that connect buyers with sellers, which sounds great and once again provides much efficiency to the world markets, but at the same time, these massive platform businesses are essentially functioning as toll gates or rent extractors from the global market, in that they charge both buyers and sellers for the opportunity to trade on those platforms. And these platform-based businesses really stand in quite a lot of contrast to the more socially sustainable businesses that I was talking about earlier, that are embracing those more donut economics models that look at environmental sustainability and social sustainability and look at adding value across the value chain and sharing that value so that we can have reciprocal rights and responsibilities and reciprocal sharing in the profits of the various different businesses that we engage in. So socially sustainable businesses are, to my mind, definitely the businesses that are going to emerge victorious in the next sort of world that we're moving into. We have definitely seen social trends from both consumers and with citizens that increasingly employees and purchasers are looking to the businesses that they deal with to reflect their values. And the values that consumers and employees are looking to are values of shared reciprocity of the fruits of the labor of employees and also with those communities that they trade with. So to my perspective, to sum up this part of the presentation, is very much that sustainable businesses need to look at social sustainability as well as environmental sustainability if they want to connect with the future consumer. So to move on to the next trend that I have here, it also fits in with this new awakening of consciousness and of societal values that is really driving change and also being driven by the current sector of change that we're really seeing across the world. And here I'm talking about the consumer and the civil society awakening as to the importance of including diversity and minority groups in our businesses, in our communities, and in our civic societies. So the picture on the screen is from a few years back. It probably seems like it's further away than it really is. But it was from the Women's March that took place very soon after Donald Trump was elected to the White House. And it really sparked the first of these waves of mass civic discontent going on about the way that minority groups or previously disadvantaged groups have been treated by their nations and by the corporations that they engage with. So gender rights is definitely a very big issue driving change. It's not something that's likely to go away, because gender rights have become once again more complicated these days, in that gender norms are shifting and even gender identities are shifting. To understand how much gender identities are shifting, we can look at what's happening with Generation Z. So Generation Z is the generational cohort that's coming of age right now in the midst of the current crisis. These are the young people that are just going to university and just starting out their first jobs right now. And with this generational cohort, 1 in 2 of them knows somebody personally who does not identify as cisgender or heterosexual. So what we're really seeing is that what was considered fringe gender identities are very much becoming mainstream gender identities. And along with this, we're seeing shifting patterns in gender norms and what families look like and what relationships look like. So we're seeing that the traditional family of the 2 parents, 1 male, 1 female with a couple of children is no longer going to be the default family going forward. Not at all. Not when we're looking at new trends emerging, things like polygamy, where young women are rejecting family and getting married altogether, and choosing rather to marry themselves, to commit to being single for the rest of their lives, for example. Or looking at how new family structures are being developed that might be polyamorous, or might have same gender parents in a family, or might have no children in a family, or might have multiple generations within one roof. All these shifting gender and relationship norms are really going to redefine what normality is in terms of a business and a corporate sense. And of course, very similar to this is, of course, the inclusivity of different forms of diversity, not just gender diversity, but also ethnic diversity, minority rights. And we can definitely see this with what's going on across the world. Now, all of this change can seem quite scary to brands and businesses who would prefer to deal perhaps with more stable sort of society. But at the same time, these waves of change and these newly defined gender roles and family roles and relationship roles can also be a very exciting opportunity if we start to look at how we can attach our brands and businesses to creating new stories, new narratives, and new norms for all of these new relationships and all of these new life milestones that might be quite different to the traditional getting married in a white dress type of story or fairy tale that we used to tell in previous generations. And that's hugely exciting, because essentially you're presented with a blank slate where brands can attach the objects that they sell or the services that they procure to these new narratives and create new stories that resonate with us. And humans are very mimetic. We are also creatures that love stories, that like to create meaning to the different stages of our lives. And it's often wonderful to create or to attach those stories and narratives to a physical object that grounds us to that experience in an increasingly effervescent and digital world. These experiences rooted in the tangible are just going to become that much more meaningful for future generations. And if you could be part of rewriting that story, creating those new milestones, you're going to be very well positioned from a social sustainability point of view. And to close off with the last trend I want to talk about is very similar to this. This is rather between the current breakdown, perhaps, in the discourse between different generations. This is a macro trend that, of course, has been in play for a very long time, because as human lives have become longer, we're finding that more and more generations are competing with each other in the same space. So whether that be the narrative space in the media, or whether that be the economic or the political space in terms of, say, we have very old politicians trying to rule very young populations. We see a lot of these conflicts taking place. Also, the pressure that's being put on the social contract between, say, welfare services and who gets to pay for them and who gets to benefit from them. And this has created an environment where there have been quite a few divides between those different generational cohorts. And this is a challenge, but at the same time, once again, it's an opportunity for brands and businesses to get involved with connecting the dots and rebuilding those connections across generations. And not just across generations, even across a single consumer, across his or her much longer lifespan. And here I'm talking about if there is a way for you to help people to stop focusing on having a very short time horizon, that is a preference towards the present, but rather looking ahead and broadening that horizon to the long now, which is roughly the 200-year period that any individual human life will touch when looking back at our grandparents and forward to our future descendants that we might get to sort of touch across that life path. And there it is very exciting if you can find a way to connect your brand or business across adding value across generations, so that you're creating something of substance and something of value that creates rather than extracts value. And that's really the message that I want to leave you with today. There are massive opportunities to build bridges and to connect all these different divides and all these spaces of fragility that we're seeing right now, and also to invest in long-term value creation rather than short-term value extraction, which is probably the most valuable message I can give to any brand right now. Thank you very much. We will be taking questions at the end of this talk after the next speaker, who I'd like to introduce to you now. Next up is going to be Esther Overbeck, the Head of Strategy Development for De Beers Group, and she is going to be talking about opportunities for growth, that is diamonds, and the recovery in China and the USA. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bronwyn. Ladies and gentlemen of the diamond industry all over the world, I'm delighted to be able to share with you the opportunities for growing demand for diamonds as the world recovers from COVID. Every strand and every trend Bronwyn touched on is relevant for us, and it's such a great speech and so inspiring. Thank you, Bronwyn. But let's be direct here and start with where we are. Just last week, the OECD, the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, said that the COVID had triggered the most severe economic recession in nearly a century, and its consequences will be severe and long-lasting. Mattie already mentioned how our industry has witnessed firsthand the impact of this crisis. And even though most jewelry stores have now reopened in our main diamond consumer countries, the impact of store closures mandated by government measures to contain the pandemic has been really deep. So in China, for example, after quite a positive start to the year, demand for diamond jewelry in the first quarter was lower by almost half versus the same period last year. E-commerce did better, falling at approximately half the rate of decline of bricks and mortar sales, still quite severe. Of course, in April, we saw a pickup of sales starting in China, and then which seems to have accelerated further in May. Many of you will have seen Tiffany's reported, sales in mainland China up 30% in April and 90% in May year on year, and also their success online. The impact of the virus containment measures in the US came only towards the end of March, and the whole jewelry sector there has been also severely affected. MasterCard, for example, reported total jewelry sales down 70% in April, and with some recovery in May, but still 50% lower than the same period the previous year. For diamonds and diamond jewelry specifically, the year started really strongly in the US. We've seen really a good January, February, but point of sales data, which we collect from a representative sample of independents and small chains, shows that diamond jewelry sales were down 80% in April year on year, and followed by a much better May, around minus 30% year on year, and performing better than any other category within that jewelry channel. These independent and small chains will be around 35%, represented about 35% of the US market, so not the full thing, but between those two, you can see how much the sector has been impacted there. Also in the US, you also have seen department stores and jewelry chains experiencing some financial pressures. And as a result, we expect them to shut down permanently, hundreds of stores, all of that with an immediate impact on the entire value chain for diamonds. But we must look ahead, and as we look ahead, there is still considerable uncertainty about, the path of recovery for the global economy. I think what I put in the next slide was the so-called alphabet soup that we see used by economists to describe recovery shapes, from V to U to L. A new one I saw the other day was small h, where the economy collapses, then starts to come back, and then sort of that recovery fizzles out again. But it also must be cognizant that the financial and monetary authorities around the world have launched trillions of US dollars in stimulus packages to sustain and promote economic and business activity. I just saw an hour ago, then I think there's more coming in the US, to really help. One thing is certain, no matter what the shape of the economic recovery, the diamond industry will rebound. And it will rebound because it has done so in every single demand downturn that we've seen in the last 100 years. But when it does rebound, which it will, economies will be smaller compared to the pre-COVID forecast levels that we had, expected to see pre-pandemic. And competition for consumers' attention and income will be fierce. That's, I suppose, where the sort of bad news ends and the good news starts, because in a sense, our industry is fortunate. Diamonds are so right for a post-pandemic world. I think other people have touched on this, but we've got to internalize this. We see this in research as well, and this is what I wanted to bring up, is what we hear people tell us. At this time, people want to connect, express their love, express commitment and emotions. They want to celebrate special moments and honor loved ones. And as the epidemic lifts, they want to give and receive meaningful gifts and lasting value, to the famous buy fewer better things. And they tell us also that diamond jewelry is the right gift for this time, sending a message that the recipient is loved and valued. Isn't that beautiful? Sending a message that the recipient is loved and valued. What a product, right? So just write it for this time. And also, if we get this thing right, the size of the prize is very large for the industry. We have worked to estimate potential value for the market, and it is $100 billion in additional demand for diamond jewelry in each the US and China in the next decade. In the next 5 years, there is a potential for diamond jewelry sales to double in China, and it could grow by 1/3 in the US. The question then is, how do we make this potential a reality? Where are the demand growth opportunities for each of these countries? So if we are to succeed, the industry must act in line with some of today's megatrends. I think Bronwyn was brilliantly, sort of expressed what those are, so we know what they are. And they apply not only to the US and China, they apply globally. And the ones I have picked here are quite specific for the next 12 to 18 months as the world starts to recover from the pandemic, but also going beyond that. So I chose the 3 that I think are quite essential for us. The first one is what I've called phygital brands with meaning. I'll explain all of that. We know that millennials, both younger millennials and older millennials, and Gen Zers, which are the generations that will continue to drive demand growth in China and the US. We know that they tell us that diamonds are highly desirable for bridal occasions, as gifts, and to self-purchase. And that is incredibly encouraging. We've just completed a brand new US study, almost 20,000 women we asked, not only was the desire as high as before, it actually improved versus 2 years ago. So it's essential news to know that the women want and love this product. But these generations, they will continue to seek out brands with an authentic voice, with meaning and purpose. So sustainability, transparency of sourcing, local community support will all increasingly be expected. They, as consumers, simply expect the store and online presence to be a source of expertise, guidance, surprise, delight. They absolutely take for granted that brands will offer a seamless, integrated range of services and engagement channels online and offline, you know, product information, setting up appointments, sales advice, purchasing, returns, all of it sort of seamlessly done between, you know, your online and offline presence. This is what's often being referred these days as phygital, i.e. physical and digital, and you know, these things are merged. So that is a huge trend that we need to act on. The second one is more short term. It's localization. In the short term, more local shopping will take place as restrictions to travel remain in place. And I think so part of this deglobalization will also bring some of that, especially the repatriation of some of that luxury spending in China. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But for the diamond industry, that localization trend offers a unique short-term opportunity to take market share from one of the traditional competitors that have done well in the last few years, namely international travel. So every year, from 15 to 20% of the value of diamond jewelry bought out by Chinese consumers is bought outside of mainland China. So the international tourism expected to decline in the next 12 months. And using data from the International Air Transport Association, the IATA, I've estimated that approximately $50 billion will not be spent by Chinese mainland consumers in international travel this year. So if we are able to capture 3 to 4% of these savings, it makes up for all the lost sales of DJ abroad. A similar opportunity exists also in the US, especially in the bridal area, given that weddings are likely to be smaller and less expensive in the near future. So there is an opportunity, no doubt. Also, people will shop more locally, which is interesting. They want to support the local communities and the local businesses. The third sort of overarching trend is what I have quote unquote called data is the new oil. This is more a pipeline, more a supply chain type of trend. I don't know if data is the new oil, but you know, people say that because it's so valuable. And I think the whole diamond supply chain must work harder to collect, analyze market trends and data, and identify consumer needs so that we as an industry can better anticipate demand and offer products that will sell. I think the industry has been a little bit inefficient in terms of how it looks at what consumers will buy. And I think the whole data analytics offers a huge opportunity. And that capability is gaining in importance also across sectors that deal with consumers in future. And so if we don't work, you know, we'll be overtaken by other sectors. So I'm not going to expand on this topic today, but it's, in my view, an area where the diamond industry needs some work to catch up, but very, very important. I will now start covering specifics of the market. So I will start with China. So the areas of growth, first of all, is bridal. So bridal, you know, we know that Chinese women have increasingly made diamond wedding rings and diamond engagement rings an important part of their wedding must-haves. Marriage rates are decreasing in China, and so is the average marriage age is increasing. You know, the average marriage age is increasing and marriage rates are decreasing. Partly it's the same thing, it's the same phenomenon. But there's still a big opportunity to grow penetration of diamonds for weddings in tier 2 and tier 3 cities and beyond, you know, where the middle classes have been growing the fastest. There's also an opportunity to upsell much more in tier 1 and some tier 2 cities. You know, here is a sophisticated young consumer base used to shopping for luxury goods, used to travel, and they seek out diamond jewelry brands with a strong physical and digital presence. So that, you know, the digital experience I mentioned before. They also want iconic or recognizable designs and an authentic voice. So even though the bridal occasion is not the largest source of growth for diamonds in China in the next 5 to 10 years, it is really where the diamond industry can engage these young consumers to help them to appreciate the uniqueness of every diamond and the unique personal stories they can tell. It's how we get them hooked so that, you know, they come back for all other occasions and become repeat purchases, which is an absolutely essential part of growing demand in China. Second opportunity is gifting. Gifting is already the largest diamond jewelry segment in China. It is also the segment with the biggest growth potential. My view is that about 60 to 65% of all the growth in China will come from this segment, gifting. It's a priority at this time, you know, given everything we said about how people are feeling. And gifting of diamond jewelry has potential across all city tiers. So as much for tier 1 cities as for tier 2, 3 and other cities. In tiers 1 and 2, these gifts will be both first-time acquirers and repeat purchases, whilst mostly tiers 2 and 3 cities and beyond will be entry point into the category as that marriage age increases. And we know that birthdays, weddings, wedding anniversaries are the biggest occasions for, you know, gifting of diamond jewelry in China. The third area for growth in China is self-purchase. Self-purchase currently is the smallest segment in the diamond jewelry market in China. But self-purchase of diamond jewelry by women is a growing global trend. Here specifically, we're talking about older millennials and repeat acquirers as the main customers. In tier 1 cities, for sure, and some tier 2 cities, that's where the best short-term opportunity is. And strong brands with recognizable designs that can be shared on social media will do really well and are doing really well as such already. Often here, there's no special occasion as such. So purchases are driven by what I call dreams. You know, you see the product, you dream about it, you see it, you know, either online, offline, or on your friends, or, you know, just someone passing on the street. And then you go buy it when the time is right. There's some interesting things also going on, perhaps more interesting local brands, potentially even new designers from Japan itself, but also from other parts of Asia, especially Japan and Korea, which Chinese consumers appear to appreciate. So with that, you know, these are the segments where you build up to that $100 billion opportunity in the next decade for diamond jewelry. In the US, now moving to the US, we see 3 large areas of opportunity as well. Unsurprisingly, bridal is the first one, but this is a slightly different approach to really get the bridal sector to grow in the US. In the US, couples are increasingly aspiring to express themselves through unique symbols of love and their bond. And, you know, it's so unique. Each journey, each story is unique. And they often want to engage in the creative process of designing their rings. So retailers must give couples the opportunity to do so through some level of customization, storytelling. In fact, quite a lot of couples are now going beyond just the normal retail channels and looking for their own sort of access to diamonds that can design their own, create their own expression, you know, unique expression of their journey. If you were in my dialogue series in the US last year, where we talked about, you know, before you get to engagement, there's so much that the couple has already lived together, you know, and have gone through together so much that there's already a story there. And I think that's most of the Western world, that's the case. So that sort of need for a more individual journey in the bridal applies to all socio-economic segments. You know, it doesn't really matter if you're at the lower middle classes or the very affluent. You know, that journey, that story, that unique storytelling is very much part of how you want to engage with your engagement ring purchase. What is new, relatively new, so it has appeared in the last 2 to 4 years, but it has increased dramatically as well, is how women are increasingly involved in the selection of engagement rings. And that is both financially, you know, to our amazement, now almost 1 in 5 engagement rings are self-purchased by the woman in the couple. So it's extraordinary, because, you know, when I joined the industry almost 20 years ago, this would, you know, have appeared really niche, and now it's becoming more important. So paying attention to that woman is essential. And she's also choosing, co-paying with her future spouse for the diamond that she wants, you know. So that is a new trend, you know, that one that we see continuing as well. Finally, here in the bridal segment in the US, there is clearly also an upselling opportunity, but only for the more affluent socioeconomic segment, you know, those paying $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 for their engagement ring or more. According to the McKinsey weekly sentiment tracker that we are looking at in the COVID side, younger and more affluent US consumers are feeling the most optimistic about the country's COVID-19 recovery and their own future. So that's, you know, that's certainly an area to focus on in the sort of immediate future as well. The second area of growth is clearly gifting, right? So love gifting is and will continue to be the largest diamond jewelry segment in the US, you know, so romantic gifts, wedding anniversaries, you know, special occasions for the couple. But as marriage age increases steadily, premarital gifting is now the main way into diamond category. And the recent strongest source of growth I have seen from research has been female gifting, especially intergenerational gifting. Expressing with a diamond that you appreciate and value someone is so appropriate right now. So this is an area absolutely to make the most of at this time. And you can also, you know, given that people are traveling less, you know, it's such a compelling way to show the emotions that are appropriate at this time. So take advantage of this opportunity. Of course, requires, if you're selling, to have a breadth of jewelry brands and price points that can address different needs of the customer base, because obviously romantic gifting is not the same as intergenerational gifting, for example, and it could be quite different price points. Finally, in the US, the self-purchase has been the fastest growing segment in the last few years, you know, and is also one with the most long-term promise as women's earning power continues to increase. This is a quite particular area because when buying for themselves, women are shunning at the moment the traditional independent and jewelry chains and prefer department stores, online, and monobrand stores. You know, this is the world of brands really, and often niche brands. Personalization, originality, edginess, creativity, inclusion of diverse cultures play an increasingly important role in this segment. We, you know, and Bronwyn was mentioning before about gender, etc. You know, it's quite clear from research what we see. Young generations' more liberal attitudes towards sexuality and gender identity have made unisex designs, for example, more popular for self-purchase. So this is an area that is attuned to the cultural movements, you know, that we see, and is an area of tremendous growth opportunity for diamonds. Other jewelries perhaps sometimes do better, especially semi-precious. In summary, at times, you know, which are sure to be difficult, diamond jewelry will continue to be relevant and desired. And consumers in China and the US tell us that they desire to be gifted and to self-purchase diamond jewelry. Some of our competition is right now less able to capture share, which is a unique opportunity for us. So using data analytics You can improve your abilities to supply the market with the right product at the right time. And really focusing on purposeful brands and the digital aspect of delivery will be key to succeeding ahead. The Natural Diamond Council initiative will, offer you tons of ideas and tools. Use them. Use an authentic tone of voice to engage with your consumer. And, be proud of all of the good that diamonds do. We have so much to be proud of. I didn't have time to talk all about the amazing things this industry has done during this crisis in support of local communities and more. Ours is an industry that can emerge stronger from this crisis.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Esther. Thank you, Bronwyn. I think I've said that several times. I hope that you, like me, my fellow audience and those that joined us today, you found the content of both presentations to be timely, not least because of the focus on our key markets, but also because of how diamonds will continue to play a part in celebrating life's special moments. As James Baldwin once said, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. Furthermore, Peter Stopel also said that legacy is not leaving something for people, but rather leaving something in people. Thank you once again for joining us, and I look forward to speaking to you again sometime in the future. You will find the De Beers Group Inside Flash Report available on the group's events app. Do take care of yourselves, and remember always that when all is said and done, more can be done than said. Thank you and have a good day.